You know, I'll be the first to admit that sometimes I have way too much time on my hands. I have watched tons of videos of YouTubers making cutting boards, and they're always using hardwoods like maple, walnut, maybe some cherry. Without any warning, a thought popped in my head about southern yellow pine. Can you make a cutting board from southern yellow pine? Well, I Googled it, and sure enough, the internet says you can. And if it's on the internet, we know it must be true, right? I even found an article written by a chef that says he prefers cutting boards from pine because they keep his expensive knives sharper longer, although the cutting board will not last as long. I searched on YouTube and found 3 or 4 people that have videos about cutting boards made from pine. From the comments left on those videos, it looks like people are pretty evenly divided about pine cutting boards, so I decided to make one for myself. I went to my local Lowe's home improvement store and bought 2 8-foot 2x4s at $4.89 a piece and 2 8-foot 2x6s at $8.98 a piece of southern yellow pine. I wasn't sure how much it would take to make a cutting board and how much waste I would have, but if you pick through the pile and get some that's not full of knots, you can get a decent sized cutting board from one 8-foot 2x4. So for less than $30, I have enough material to make 5 or 6 cutting boards. I cut one of the 8-foot 2x4s into 4 2-foot pieces, then ran them through the table saw, cutting about 1/8 inch off of each side to get rid of the radius on the edge. Then I cut those pieces down the middle to give me 8 strips that you see here in the glue up. Then I surfaced it using my CNC and went back to the table saw to cut them into 1 3/4 inch strips to make the end grain pattern that is in the clamps here. After the glue had dried, I scraped off the glue snot and surfaced both sides on the CNC and ran a profile pass to clean up the edges. I added the juice groove and then sanded to 320 grit, and it was time for the mineral oil bath. You can see that even with something as cheap as southern yellow pine, you can get some interesting patterns by alternating the grain during the glue ups. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with the final result. So okay, I've shown you that for less than $5 you can make a pretty decent cutting board. But I wanted to take it a step further. I wanted to see if you could make an inlay using an end grain cutting board made from pine. Will it work, or will there be a lot of tear out because it's a soft wood? I searched on YouTube and I couldn't find a single video of someone making an inlay cutting board using pine. So there's only one way to find out. I made another end grain cutting blank from the other 2x4 and put it on the CNC to create the pocket for an inlay. It only took a few minutes to run the pocket clearance toolpath, and I didn't see any tear out, so I continued to run the finishing pass of the pocket with my Amana bit. The pocket came out pretty good, except for this knot that you can see in this photo. I knew that was going to be a problem, so I measured its location and placed it in VCarve Pro. Then I could rotate the blank in such a way that the knot would be in the material that's being removed and covered by the inlay and not seen. After about an hour and a half of cutting out the fibers that were bent over and not cut, it was time to move on to the inlay. I chose this piece of light cherry for the inlay. There's not a lot of contrast between the pine and the cherry, but I tested a small piece of cherry by dipping it in the mineral oil, and it darkened up pretty good. I just hope there will be enough contrast in the final result. With all the fuzzies cleaned up from the pocket and the plug, it was time for some glue and a night in the press. There was a lot of little nooks and crannies to get the glue in, and I was hoping I wouldn't break any of the fragile pieces as I inserted the plug. I left it in the press overnight, and the next morning it was time to surface it to see if I was going to spend time sanding it or throw it in the fire pit. There's still some sanding to go, but the inlay worked great. You can see I had some separation on the right side of the board, and I had to mix up a slurry of wood glue and sanding dust to fill it in. I took my water bottle and sprayed it down to raise the grain, and it gives me an idea of how it will look after the mineral oil bath. After it dried, I continued sanding with 120 grit, then moving to 240, and finally 320 grit. Then it was time for the money shot.
Success.
Okay, what did I learn in this little experiment? Well, I learned that you can make a pretty decent end-grain cutting board for less than $5 worth of material if you're willing to pick through the pile of 2x4s and look for three things. 1. Try to find the ones that don't have many knots. 2. Hold the 2x4 up to your eye and look down the length of it and try to find the straightest crooked ones. And 3, and probably the most important one, look at the end of the board and find the ones with a lot of growth rings. The more, the better. And as for the inlay in pine, yes, you can do it, but the grain in pine makes it a little too busy for my liking. I think they look better without the inlay. However, if you're someone who is just starting to learn how to do detailed inlays and on a tight budget, pine might be a good choice. Spend $5, make a pine end-grain cutting board to use to get your settings dialed in, then buy the more expensive material. So, if you're wanting to make a pine end-grain cutting board, I would say just
Do it, lady.